At 2:13 in the morning, a security camera captured a white van moving slowly through a quiet neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. No headlights, no sudden turns, just a slow crawl past the home of 4-year-old Nancy Guthrie. Less than 24 hours later, she vanished. But investigators would later believe this didn't start that night. It started weeks earlier. Nancy had lived in the Catalina Foothills for over 50 years. Wealthy homes, empty roads, a neighborhood where strangers stood out immediately. Which is why one neighbor couldn't stop thinking about the van parked near Nancy's street the day before she disappeared. The vehicle sat there for almost 40 minutes. Then the driver stepped out. He looked around carefully, walked to the side door, and started wiping fingerprints off the van. Slowly, methodically, like he already knew investigators would eventually see it. That single moment changed everything. Because ordinary people do not erase fingerprints in broad daylight. Soon after Nancy vanished, neighbors began reporting strange activity that suddenly felt connected. Men pretending to be contractors had been knocking on doors for days, asking unusual questions about cameras, alarms, and elderly residents living alone. But something felt wrong. Most of them carried no tools, no equipment, no paperwork. One resident later admitted he believed someone had been studying the neighborhood long before Nancy disappeared, mapping routines, watching homes, identifying targets. And Nancy fit perfectly. She lived alone, followed the same schedule every morning, walked her tiny dog Piper at nearly the same time every day. After decades in the neighborhood, she trusted the environment around her. But predators look for routine, and routine creates vulnerability. Then everything changed. Nancy suddenly stopped answering calls. Friends couldn't reach her. Her car remained parked outside the house, but investigators reportedly found signs that her daily routine had been interrupted without warning. Lights left on, coffee unfinished, personal belongings untouched. It didn't look like someone preparing to leave. It looked like someone disappeared in the middle of an ordinary day. But then the case took a disturbing turn. Investigators quietly stopped referring to Nancy as a missing person. Behind closed doors, the language changed completely. And when detectives reclassify a case that quickly, it usually means evidence inside the home told them something the public wasn't supposed to know yet. Then 4 days later, authorities discovered a burned vehicle outside Tucson. Inside the vehicle was a body. Officials released one short statement claiming the incident was unrelated to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. And then they went silent. No explanation. No updates. Nothing. But witnesses noticed one terrifying detail. The burned vehicle was described as a white van. Same color. Same timing. Same county. Suddenly, this no longer felt random. It felt planned. And then, nearly 100 days into the investigation, a man named Aaron called into a live stream discussing the case. At first, he sounded like another obsessed true crime follower. Until he started mentioning details almost nobody publicly remembered. That's when the internet began asking a horrifying question. How did Aaron know so much about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance? By day 100, the investigation had already started collapsing under silence. No arrests. No public suspects. No explanation for the burned white van found outside Tucson. And yet behind the scenes, investigators had quietly shifted the case from a missing persons investigation to something far darker. That alone terrified people following the story. Because law enforcement usually avoids that move, unless evidence forces them to make it. Then the situation took another disturbing turn. A man calling himself Aaron appeared during a late-night live stream discussing Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. At first, nobody paid much attention to him. He sounded calm, intelligent, almost rehearsed, like someone who had spent weeks studying every detail of the case. But then Aaron started mentioning things that instantly changed the atmosphere of the stream. Specific details. Forgotten details. Details most casual followers wouldn't even remember. He brought up the Bitcoin ransom demand almost immediately. 1 Bitcoin up front, more money later. A payment structure investigators had barely discussed publicly. Then he referenced the backpack investigators allegedly recovered early in the case a detail that had quietly disappeared from online conversations weeks earlier. That's when the hosts stopped interrupting him, because suddenly Aaron no longer sounded like an obsessed viewer. He sounded informed. The deeper he talked, the stranger things became. Aaron confidently explained why Nancy may have been targeted specifically because of her daughter Savannah Guthrie's fame. According to him, the kidnappers weren't chasing a random elderly victim. They were chasing leverage. A recognizable family name. National attention. Money. And for the first few minutes, everything Aaron said sounded disturbingly logical. But then they pushed him harder. One of the hosts asked a direct question. "Who do you think actually took Nancy?" And instantly, Aaron changed. His answers became vague. Sentences got longer. He started jumping between theories, cartels, organized crews, local criminals, border connections. Every time the hosts tried forcing him into a clear answer, he drifted somewhere else. Like he suddenly became afraid of saying too much. Then viewers noticed something chilling in the background of the call. A strange sound. High-pitched. Distressed. Some viewers thought it sounded like a small dog crying. Others believed it was a child somewhere behind Aaron's microphone. Within hours, clips of the audio spread across social media, and people began obsessing over one question. Who was in the room with him? Aaron later claimed the sound came from a neighbor's pug with separation anxiety. He even explained that the neighbors had warned him about the dog months earlier. The explanation sounded detailed. Almost too detailed. And that's when internet investigators started digging into Aaron himself. His alleged business records surfaced online. People discovered references to a handyman company connected to his name. Others claimed he had appeared in unrelated broadcasts years earlier. Every new discovery made the mystery surrounding him even stranger. But one detail continued bothering everyone watching the case. Aaron knew things he shouldn't have known. And investigators never publicly explained whether they spoke to him afterward, which created a terrifying possibility. Maybe Aaron was exactly who he claimed to be. Or maybe he inserted himself into the story because he was already closer to it than anyone realized. While the internet obsessed over Aaron's mysterious phone call, investigators were already looking much closer to Nancy Guthrie's personal life. Because statistically, cases involving elderly victims rarely begin with strangers forcing their way inside. Most begin with familiarity. Someone trusted. Someone recognized. Someone who already understood the victim's routines before the crime ever happened. And according to people following the investigation, detectives quickly focused on individuals connected to Nancy's inner circle. One name surfaced almost immediately. Leeds. Authorities reportedly detained him early in the investigation. Not casually interviewed, detained. That detail mattered because warrants require probable cause. Judges don't approve them based on rumors or internet speculation. Investigators needed evidence strong enough to justify taking legal action. But then, something strange happened. LD was released. No charges. No explanation. No public clarification about what investigators allegedly found, or why the case suddenly stalled. That silence created even more suspicion. Then another detail started circulating online. According to multiple discussions surrounding the case, LD allegedly had a relationship with someone connected to Nancy's extended family. If true, it would completely change how investigators viewed the disappearance. Because suddenly, this wouldn't look like a random targeting. It would look personal. It would explain how someone may have known Nancy's routines, her neighborhood, and exactly when she would be alone. But before the public could fully process that possibility, another name entered the investigation. Derek Culla. And this is where the timeline became deeply unsettling. Derek reportedly contacted both Annie and Tommaso, the last two known people confirmed to have seen Nancy alive before she disappeared. Not one of them. Both of them. Text message. Phone calls. Communication surrounding the exact window investigators were trying to reconstruct. That immediately caught attention. Because detectives rarely ignore people communicating directly with the final witnesses connected to a disappearance. Then investigators made another move that shocked online followers of the case. They seized Derek's vehicle, and they kept it for 41 days. Not 4 days. Not 1 week. 41 days. That's an unusually long forensic hold, unless investigators believe the vehicle may contain critical evidence requiring extensive examination, DNA processing, fiber analysis, digital tracking, trace evidence. Something inside that vehicle forced investigators to keep digging far longer than normal. But once again, no arrest followed. No public explanation. Just more silence. And at that point, people began noticing a pattern in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Every major development appeared to lead somewhere important before suddenly disappearing behind closed doors. The white van, the burned vehicle, the ransom messages, Aaron's suspicious phone call, the 41-day vehicle seizure. Each piece felt connected, but nobody outside the investigation could fully explain how. Then the ransom situation became even more disturbing, because investigators weren't dealing with one ransom demand. There were reportedly 2 completely different payment structures. One demanded millions of dollars with a strict deadline. The other requested Bitcoin payments in stages, almost like whoever wrote it expected long-term negotiations. That detail changed everything, because experienced investigators immediately recognized what it could mean. Either multiple people were involved, or someone was improvising after the original plan started falling apart. And then, according to reports surrounding the case, approximately $300 was transferred into a Bitcoin wallet connected to the ransom communication. A small payment, almost like someone testing whether the kidnappers were real. But after the transfer was made, the communication reportedly stopped. Completely. No proof of life. No new demands. Nothing. That's when investigators quietly reclassified the case. Because suddenly, the silence itself became evidence. By the 4th month of the investigation, the Nancy Guthrie case no longer felt like a disappearance. It felt like a story someone was actively trying to keep buried. The media slowly moved on. National coverage disappeared. News trucks left Tucson, but online investigators kept circling the same disturbing question. If detectives believed Nancy was no longer alive, then what exactly convinced them? Because officially, almost nothing had been released. No cause. No suspect. No confirmed timeline. Just silence. But hidden inside that silence were details that became impossible to ignore. Near the roads leading into the Catalina Foothills sat a series of ordinary orange construction barrels. Most drivers passed them every day without thinking twice, but these weren't normal road barriers. They contained traffic cameras. And according to researchers following the case, several were positioned along routes directly connected to Nancy's neighborhood. That changed everything. Because if the white van truly entered or exited the area around the time Nancy disappeared, investigators likely had footage of it. Which raised another terrifying question. What did those cameras capture that the public still hasn't seen? People began wondering whether detectives already knew far more than they were willing to admit publicly, because every major decision in the investigation suggested hidden evidence existed somewhere behind the scenes. Then online followers noticed something else. Nancy's property itself had changed. A heavy chain blocked the driveway entrance. A no trespassing sign swung near the front gate under the Arizona heat. But according to reports, investigators never officially sealed the property as an active crime scene. The chain appeared later, and the reason behind it became deeply unsettling. Internet streamers and amateur investigators had started showing up at the house searching for answers after official updates nearly vanished. Strangers with cameras became more persistent than the media itself. Think about how disturbing that really is. An elderly woman disappears from one of the safest neighborhoods in Arizona, and eventually the only people still publicly asking questions are strangers online. That's when the emotional center of the case started hitting people harder than the mystery itself. Because Nancy wasn't anonymous. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, sat in front of millions of Americans every morning on national television, while her own mother remained missing somewhere beyond public view. And according to investigators, that connection may have been exactly why Nancy was targeted in the first place. Not because she was wealthy, not because she was vulnerable, but because she was reachable. Someone may have believed taking Nancy would create pressure powerful enough to force money, media attention, or cooperation. But then the plan appeared to collapse. The ransom communication stopped. The Bitcoin wallet went quiet. And no proof Nancy was alive ever surfaced publicly again. That detail haunted people following the investigation because experienced criminal profilers often look for one specific behavioral shift: the moment offenders lose control of the original plan. And in this case, everything after the ransom demands felt unstable, contradictory, panicked. Almost like whoever orchestrated the disappearance never expected the case to explode nationally. Then came the realization that terrified people most. What if investigators already know who's responsible, but don't yet have enough evidence to prove it? Because by this stage, detectives had already detained individuals, seized vehicles, tracked ransom activity, and reclassified the case entirely. Yet somehow, nobody had been charged. And that created the darkest possibility of all. Someone connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance may still be walking free. The longer the Nancy Guthrie case stayed unsolved, the more disturbing the silence became. Not because people stopped caring, because too many questions never received answers. The white van disappeared. The burned vehicle investigation vanished from public discussion. The ransom communication suddenly stopped after money reportedly entered the Bitcoin wallet. And the one caller who seemed unusually informed about the case was never publicly cleared. Every thread led somewhere dark before abruptly ending. But investigators understand something the public often struggles to accept. Cases like this rarely collapse because of one mistake. They collapse because too many people know small pieces of the truth. And somewhere inside the Nancy Guthrie investigation, detectives may already know exactly which pieces matter most. Think about the timeline. Weeks before Nancy vanished, strangers posing as contractors moved through the neighborhood, asking questions about homes, cameras, and elderly residents. Then a white van appeared outside her street. A man carefully wiped fingerprints from the vehicle in broad daylight. Less than 24 hours later, Nancy disappeared without signs of forced entry. That doesn't feel impulsive. It feels prepared. Then, 4 days later, a body was discovered inside a burned vehicle outside Tucson. Authorities called it unrelated almost immediately, but never explained why. No detailed public timeline, no major updates, just silence that grew heavier month after month. And sometimes, silence tells you more than evidence. Because when investigators stop speaking publicly, it often means one of two things. Either they have nothing, or they're protecting the direction of the case. Then there's the psychological side of all this. The ransom demands reportedly shifted in tone almost immediately. One demanded millions with a hard deadline. Another used staged Bitcoin payments, almost like someone experimenting in real time. Criminal profilers often look closely at that kind of inconsistency because organized offenders usually stay controlled. But panic changes behavior. Fear changes plans. And when offenders realize investigators are moving closer, communication often becomes chaotic before disappearing completely. That may be exactly what happened here. Then there's Aaron, the late-night caller who somehow remembered details most people had forgotten. The man whose confidence disappeared the moment direct questions started coming. Maybe he was simply obsessed with the case. Or maybe psychological pressure exposed something else entirely. Because deception rarely breaks during prepared statements. It breaks during unexpected confrontation. And according to viewers, that's exactly when Aaron's behavior shifted. But the darkest part of this entire story isn't the white van, or the ransom messages, or even the possibility that multiple people were involved. It's Nancy herself, an 84-year-old woman who spent more than 50 years building a peaceful life in the desert suddenly vanished, and the world slowly moved on while her family remained trapped inside the uncertainty. No funeral, no answers, no closure, just questions. And somewhere in Tucson, there may still be people carrying pieces of the truth they've never revealed publicly. That's what makes this case so haunting. Not what we know. What investigators may already know, but still can't prove. Because after months of silence, seized evidence, suspicious calls, ransom demands, and unexplained connections, one fact remains impossible to ignore. Nancy Guthrie never came home. And until someone finally breaks, this case will continue living in the terrifying space between suspicion and proof,